This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurie French, and I'm the president of the Canadian School Board Association. Thank you for joining today. This is really a huge opportunity for the CSBA to have a conversation with Senator Stan Kutcher to discuss mental health and well-being in the environment of COVID-19 and the pandemic. Dr. Stan Kutcher is a leading psychiatrist and professor who's helped many young people successfully manage major mental health illnesses, and many of us to understand and learn from his knowledge. His work has ranged from clinical research to medical education innovations, and he has developed and helped deploy innovative school mental health literacy and youth mental health care capacity building programs in primary health care. He's published over 400 articles and authored, co-authored, or edited numerous books on various aspects of mental health, including adolescent brain development and school mental health. He was appointed to the Senate as an independent senator to represent his home province of Nova Scotia in 2019. And as a senator, Dr. Kutcher continues to advocate on behalf of young people with mental illness while representing the interests of Nova Scotians in Parliament. His work is reflected on the pages of teenmentalhealth.org, a website dedicated to supporting youth that I hope you'll all check out. He is a friend to the Canadian School Board Association and elected trustees, and we are very grateful for his time today to speak with us and provide some important information to consider, particularly as school boards look ahead to prepare for the re-entry phase following the pandemic. So Dr. Kutcher, I wonder if you could begin by first speaking about what mental health and well-being truly is. These are terms that are often used loosely, and it's important for us to be clear on what we're talking about and be clear in the strategies we might suggest. So can you speak to us about that?
Sure, and thank you, Laurie, for having me here with you. And you're right, Canadian School Boards Association, and I go way back, it's delightful to once again, although I am in such a different capacity now in my role in the Senate, to rekindle that friendship. And I hope that you and your family are doing well, and I hope that everyone who is listening to this, they are slogging their way through this challenge that we are currently facing.
Thank you.
And I think it's really important to be very, very clear about what we mean when we talk about mental health and well-being and wellness. And these words are very often used interchangeably. And it's important to really understand that mental health is not about feeling good all the time, and neither is wellness. And people sometimes confuse that because there has been so much discussion about feeling good, positive mental health, good mental health, and people have no clear understanding what that means. But over time, that has morphed into this expectation that if we are mentally healthy or well, that we are feeling good all the time. Well, life is not like that. It's just no way that anybody in the world can go through every single day in their life and feel good and happy constantly. It's just not going to happen. And it's a chimera. And in fact, there's some interesting research that shows that people who expect to feel that way get very disappointed and feel very negative when things don't go their way and don't have the capacities to cope. So mental health really means the ability to adapt to the circumstances, be they challenges or opportunities that life presents us. And sometimes those circumstances are small and sometimes they're huge, but it is always that adaptive capacity. The reality is that normal negative emotions that are appropriate to the circumstance at hand are actually a sign of good mental health. I mean, if you are facing an exam and have no concerns whatsoever about the exam, you're not getting the stimulus to study. If you lose someone who you love dearly and you don't grieve and feel really, really sad and upset, then there's something really a problem with your mental health. And so we have to remember that mental health does not mean feeling good. It actually means engaging with the challenges and opportunities that life brings us. And because of that, we have to understand that our emotional states, particularly the negative emotional states, are there for a purpose. They're to signal to us that there is a challenge or opportunity that we need to pay attention to. They're to engage us in the cognitive capacities that we need to solve the challenge or take advantage of the opportunity. And they're there to drive us to seek assistance from others. So we feel negative emotions for a purpose. It's just a signal that we have to do something. It's a signal we have to engage our cognitive problem-solving capabilities. And it's a signal that we have to get help from others. And when we do all those things and we overcome the challenge and we take advantage of the opportunity, the signal goes away and we don't feel upset, annoyed, worried, concerned anymore after that. And if the signal persists, it means that we haven't quite solved the problem. So those emotional states are so important. And feeling mentally healthy and feeling well does not mean not feeling badly when it's appropriate to the situation. So that's so important to remember.
Well, I think that's is reassuring, actually, to normalize those feelings. We know that families, we know that our staff in the school system, society in general, is dealing with a lot of emotions right now, coming through the last number of months. And so understanding how, how to respond when those feelings that are quite natural, as you've described, how we continue to move forward and work through that. So thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. And it is really important, as you say, that is something to keep in mind. Because if we expect that we would go through a crisis such as we're going through now without having those negative emotions, that would be just a fantasy. It would be delusional to think that you could actually engage with these big challenges that life is giving us without those negative emotions. Now, that being said, there are huge differences amongst Canadians in how well we are adapting and coping with some of these challenges. And for many people, they're experiencing the emotions of inconvenience. They're at home, they're middle class, they have a job, their families are there, yes, and there may be conflict in those things and there are challenges. But in one of the recent Angus Reid polls, for example, when people were asked about their relationships in their families, 80% of Canadians said that they were as good as or better than they had been before COVID. But there are some people who are marginalized, who are more vulnerable, who have lost their job, who maybe have a chronic illness, a mental illness or a physical illness, have lost a loved one. These are living in a family with violence. So these are young people or older people or people your age and my age that may have their adaptive capacities really being challenged. And they're the people who need those external mental health supports. The rest of Canadians, we can get on with our friends, our family members, for children and young people, to trusted adults. So that's what we're seeing, because in the school setting, a lot of young people would come to their teacher, would come to their counselor, would come to the band leader or the sports coach. In this situation, they don't have that outlet, and so they're turning, and appropriately and very well, to things like Kids Health Phone, which is stepping up into that breach. And so those are important things that we can do. But we have to remember that if we're feeling upset, that's pretty normal. And what we don't need to rush out for professional treatment for normal human emotions.
Okay. You shared a visual that you've been doing some work on that outlines the trajectory, I guess, of some of this across the pandemic and the phases that we might see and feel. This is really of great benefit to school boards as we consider how to prepare for the re-entry phase. I'm going to just bring that up because I think it's an excellent visual for us. You might speak to that. think you'll be able to see that now. This
Yeah,
was
there it is.
for me as we had a conversation to understand what this will look like as we go forward. So I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about this. Thank you.
Sure, and you can see there in your lower left, the beginning of the curve, we call it the curve of concern. At the beginning, the emotional states are confusion or denial or what's going on? Are you really sure about this? And you can think back on when we started to hear about this, there was that. And then as more and more information came in, the uncertainty which we were feeling changed to fear. And that was the dominant emotion. It wasn't anxiety. It was fear, because by definition, fear is hyperarousal in the face of a threat. By definition, anxiety is hyperarousal without a threat. And it matters because the antidote to fear is courage. And the action that fear drives us to is to mitigate the threat. We have to come together and focus on how to mitigate the threat. And so what we've done is we've done exactly that. We've come together as a society. We've done what the public health authorities have told us we need to do. And we have worked together with the end result of trying to mitigate the threat. If we think this is anxiety, the major pattern for anxiety is avoidance and self-soothing. So we turn inwards instead of outwards. So this is fear. And then when we started to see that the curve was starting to flatten, and I've used deaths as the indicator here, because cases depends on testing. That the curve is starting to flatten. We sort of enter a zone, and I've called it a zone of hope, and that's in the box. And however, there were three different responses that can happen here. The first response is, depending on how long the period of time is, and that's in the white dotted line, people can say, oh my gosh, we've been in this zone for a long, long time and nothing is changing, it's not getting better. So we're just gonna forget it and just do what we want. Well, if that happens, we could really see a second wave. Another alternative, same outcome, but a different cognitive set is, things are so much better, things aren't getting worse, so I can go back and do what I want. That also has a negative impact. So this zone, we call it the zone of hope, but it's also a zone in which the very predominant emotional state is disgruntlement. You know, it's not fun anymore. We're going through the motions, we're going through this, and I call it slogging. And I've used that word deliberately because it's like going through mud. You have to keep going, but it feels like slogging and slogging. And at the same time, particularly for educators and school boards, you are thinking about what's going to happen when I reach the end of that box. And that brings its own uncertainties into play. And that's what I would call the reset. What's going to happen in the resetting of activities that we will be taking part in? And for some people who are in the workforce, it means a rethinking about what's the difference between work and the workplace. So we're seeing a number of corporations, a number of other organizations thinking more critically about how much of the work can be done outside of the traditional workplace. We're also seeing people start to think about, how can I ensure that if I go into the workplace, and so for educators, that's the classroom, or that is the school, when I go back into the workplace, how can I be sure? How can I be sure that I am safe? How can I be sure that my students are safe? How can I be sure that my students don't bring COVID back to their families? How can I be sure that I don't get COVID in the workplace and bring it back to my mother who lives with me and who has end-stage renal failure but is in the home? And so all these questions become really, really important questions, and they drive, again, a real high degree of uncertainty and worry. And worry is dealt with by having clear threat analysis. Okay, what is the threat? Where is it coming from? And clear mitigation of that threat. So it's maintaining the vigilance that we started with at the beginning of this curve, the vigilance that came with the fear, and maintaining that vigilance to ensure that when we return to the workplace, that how we do that will mitigate the risk to us as educators, to our families, to our students, and to the families of our students. We also have to be very, very clear about what we know and about what we don't know. There is still a lot of things about this virus, about how it works, that we don't know. But one of the things that's happening now around the world is different jurisdictions are moving in different rates of speed to reopen the workplace, schools. And so we'll be able to watch and see what happens as those come back online. We can look at what precautions did these different places take? For example, what happened in Taiwan? How are they doing it in Sweden? What was in Canada? There are schools that are reopening soon and places which are not reopening for a while. What can we learn from those places that reopen soon? So this period of time is a time of uncertainty, and that's okay. But what we can also do with this time of uncertainty is ensure that we spend the very careful, detailed analysis necessary so that we can mitigate these risks. And we have to start thinking critically about, are there ways that we are going to structure the workplace or the school environment that may have to reflect a potential reality that this COVID-19 will become endemic, that it will be here in the population. And so how can we mitigate that reality? So there still are a lot of uncertainties, and it's really important during these times of uncertainties to ensure that everybody has a chance to have their questions asked, that everybody has a chance to have their questions answered, with the caveat that we don't know all the answers yet. Right. But people have to be heard. They have to say, this is what I'm worried about. This is my concern. And then we have to sit down together and problem solve and say, given that these are the worries, given that this is what we know, given that this is what we don't know, what's the best course of action that we can come to together at this point in time, realizing that it depends in different parts of the country. There may be different answers to those questions. So if there have been absolutely no cases at all for a month and a half, well, that's a very different situation than if there are cases that are ongoing. So those, we would not expect the same outcomes in every part of the country at the same time. So important considerations.
Absolutely, thank you. I think we've seen some outstanding leadership in our schools, outreach of our school administrators and principals and teachers who know their students and have provided some supports for families in need. How can school board trustees, as I say, really be able to support the system to continue that work and really create the conditions for the system to thrive? We have a job to support that tone at the top and make sure that our schools are successful. Any other advice as we wrap up around how we can make sure that our schools feel the support of the governors behind them and have the resources they need as best we possibly can?
Well, and I think that the crux here is best as we possibly can. But I think that we have to be very honest about what we do know and what we don't know. So this is all about risk mitigation. What is the risk? How can we best mitigate it? Listening to the teachers as they're coming in, listening to the principals, the superintendents, because they have that responsibility for making sure that the workplace is safe. Listening to the parents, because there may be one thing for educators to think that the workplace is safe, but the parents may have a very different perspective on that. A recent poll that came out showed that Abacus, that 1/3 it broke up into thirds. 1/3 of Canadians think that schools are okay to go back to. 1/3 say no way, and another third say we don't know. So it's really, really important that the parental voice be heard, and also the student voice. I mean, the kids are afraid of this. The kids now have become more accustomed to this, but developmentally appropriate voice of the kids has to be heard too, because they're the ones that are going to have to change a lot of their routines. Can open classrooms survive this? Will there be different ways of structuring learning and teaching in this new environment? How will that environment be established that is taking into cognizance the realities of the situation that we have? So these are all questions that we have. The important thing is not to stop the questioning. And equally important is it to make sure that we don't jump to conclusions about what the right answers are when we don't have the right answers. It's okay to say we don't know. But given what we do know, this is what we think might be a reasonable approach.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Any final thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I just want to thank you, the school boards, the educators in this country, the trustees, everybody that has worked during this time of COVID, reaching out to kids electronically, reaching out to kids in all sorts of different ways, trying to keep those human connections with the kids going, trying to keep some educational activities with the kids going. Teachers sometimes don't understand, maybe they do, but they don't understand how vitally important they are to the growth and development of our kids, and how much the kids need their parents, but the kids also need their teachers. So I want to just thank you and recognize you for this incredible work that you do.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Always grateful for your time and expertise. This has been an opportunity for us, and we look very much forward to sharing the message and speaking with you again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurie, and best of all to you and yours.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye now.